Okay, so we need to finish up chapter 13 tonight, and then we need to get into chapter 14. Chapter 13, we left off with math, discount points. Now we want to talk about some other types of loan fees you might encounter. The easiest math in the class, I think, might be excise taxes, which is just do what? Purchase price divided by 500. The second easiest, one slide here, might help. The second easiest might be origination fees. Because origination fees are always stated as exactly what they are. A percent of the loan amount. If they say we're charging a 1% origination fee, we're charging 1% of the loan amount. The only catch there, and where you'll go wrong, is you'll calculate 1% of the purchase price instead. Remember, loan fees are based on loan amounts. Is everybody good with that? Okay. So, as an example, so a buyer secured a $50,000 loan and had to pay a 1.5% origination fee. Well, it's just going to be 1.5% of that loan amount, or $750. And that's a closing cost. When you hear that magic bucket of closing costs, all these things that you're learning to calculate right now go into that bucket of closing costs for the buyer. Origination fees, discount points, interim interest. All of those are just closing costs for a buyer. Yes, ma'am.
Is this stuff that we are actually calculating, or is there a software that does all of this?
You're doing it all.
Okay, I didn't know.
No,
You were just
I'm kidding. You're not. You're not. In this class, you're doing it all.
Just doing it.
But in the real world, closing attorney's doing it.
Okay.
Well, the closing attorney's paralegal is doing it.
Gotcha.
And I've never seen a closing attorney actually calculate one. But in general, the closing statement is going to be prepared by the paralegal at the closing attorney's office, and then they're going to send it to the lender for their approval. And once they've blessed it, then you'll get a copy. But you're expected to verify all those charges. So the only way you can verify them is to know how to do the math behind it, right? We're expected to verify the charges which we reasonably can verify. There's always going to be some charges on there which we won't be able to verify. You know, lots of times the bank doesn't tell you what percent they're charging for the origination fee. They just simply say the origination fee is $1,650. Well, you can't verify that. You just have to accept that's what the origination fee is. But there are certainly things on there that you can verify. We haven't even gotten the closing statements yet, but what kind of things can you verify on a closing statement? What now? Taxes, absolutely. You can verify the property taxes, right? We're talking about how to do those and prorate those. What else can you verify? What things are on the sales contract? What numbers that might migrate over to the closing statement?
The due diligence fee?
Earnest money, can you verify that? Sure.
Due diligence fee?
Due diligence fee. Y'all forgetting the big number at the top of the page. Sales price, we can verify. Absolutely. Commission, you better verify the commission. You can verify that. There are lots of numbers of excise taxes. You can verify those, right?
Any inspections or any
Inspections or anything like that. We can verify those charges, and we're expected to verify those charges. Now, turn in your book to page 324. And this is actually one of my favorite things to teach y'all, because it kind of blows your mind that we used to do it this way. And one of the interesting things is I still do it this way because it's the way I learned the business. Before, see how old I am now. Before we had these things in our pocket all the time, when we went out showing houses, we would carry a little card. It's about this big. Usually a lender gave it to you. And it had a wheel on one side with interest rates on it. You'd flip it around to whatever the going interest rate was. And then on the other side, it had a little tab that you'd slide out for whether they were getting a 10-year loan, a 15-year loan, a 30-year loan. And you'd slide it over. And in the middle, it had a little red window. And in that red window would be a number. And it would look a lot like these numbers in this chart right here. It's called a loan factor. A loan factor. And it's just a payment. It's a principal and interest payment. But these are small numbers, aren't they? It's a principal and interest payment on a very small loan. Anybody want to guess how small the loan is? $1,000. That's what your principal and interest payment would be if you only borrowed how much money? $1,000. Well, if you know how much your payment is for $1,000, can't you calculate your payment for $100,000? Or $150,000? Or $167,000, right? That's the beauty of a loan factor. Once you know a loan factor, you pretty much know how much somebody's payment's going to be for a specific loan. So do me a favor. Find me the payment for a 15-year note at 5% interest. You're going to go over to the column for 15 year, and you're going to go down to 5%. $7.91 per thousand, right? So let's talk about how that would be useful. It's useful in a bunch of ways. Number one, you could calculate somebody's payment based on that, right? Even more useful than that, I find, is in the negotiation process. Sometimes we get down to negotiating over a couple $1,000s, right? $7.91 is pretty close to $8, right? If I had a client, I'm representing the buyer, and the seller has counteroffered to them, and their counteroffer is $2,000 more than where my buyer's last offer is, and my buyer's borrowing money, and they're reluctant to accept that offer, I might say to them, is it worth $16 a month to you? Because isn't that a loan factor? I'm just taking that loan factor and doing what with it? Multiplying it by 2, because we're $2,000 apart, right? And if they borrow $2,000 extra, it's basically $7.91 times 2, which is roughly 16 bucks. Do you see how that works? How you can actually still use this idea of a loan factor in your everyday life? It's just an easy, quick tool to be able to quickly calculate a number without having to have a mortgage calculator. You don't need that. All you need is the loan factor. And here's the great thing about a loan factor. Interest rates don't change on a daily basis. When you go out showing houses, what kind of loan are most of your clients getting? A 30, 15, 20, what kind of term?
30.
30 years. What's the going interest rate today? Roughly. 4%, 4.25%. Okay. So I could go out showing houses. I don't need to memorize the chart. All I need to memorize is 4.25% on a 30-year term. And what is that? $4.92, right?
Yep.
Does everybody see that? $4.92. So in my head, that turns into what? $5. $5. So if we're looking at two houses and one's $10,000 more expensive than the other, to my client, that's really what? $50 a month. Is that not a useful tool when you're showing houses?
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have to pull out a calculator to do it. I didn't have to go on the internet to some bank rate calendar to do it. I can quickly show them houses. I say, this house is $50 more a month than that one. Will your clients find that useful? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just knowing how to use a loan factor. That's it. That's it. I mean, because the truth is, rates don't float around a lot, so you pretty much, once you learn what the going interest rate is, you can stay on that loan factor forever until rates change significantly. In your mind, anyway. So for test-taking purposes, they're going to want you to calculate a payment. Turn over to number 6 in your packet here. Number 6 says, using the loan factor chart on page 324, please identify the correct monthly principal and interest payment for each $1,000 borrowed on a 15-year note at 5.5% interest. There's absolutely no math involved there. It's just a matter of can you read the chart. So take a second, find the 15-year column, and then 5.5%. My eyes are old, I have to use spectacle line myself. What is it?
8.18.
$8.18, right?
Mm-hmm.
See how easy it is? This is a question you should look forward to on the test,
Mm-hmm.
right? Absolutely, look forward to that question. Here's the only hard thing about this on the test. You gotta memorize the whole chart.
Yeah.
You do? You don't. Phoebe had 3 heart attacks. They will give you a little snippet of the chart in the question. They will just give you like 4 lines of the chart. So it's really even easier on the test than it is in real life because you only have like 4 or 5 lines of the chart to deal with. Very easy question. So now look at number 7. I bet if you had looked at number 7 before you had a loan factor chart, you'd have thought there's no way I can calculate that payment. Can you calculate that payment now that you have a loan factor chart?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you should be able to look up the payment per 1,000 for a 30-year fixed rate loan at 5.25. What do you see for that payment? I got $5.53. What everybody's coming up with? $5.53. So the only real question is, how many times am I making that $5.53 payment, right?
288.
To do that, I got to calculate the loan amount, don't I? Is everybody with me? So, what did they tell me about the loan? They said we had a $360,000 purchase
80% on the value.
at an 80% LTV. So, $360,000 times 80%, what is it?
$288,000.
288.
Uh-huh.
288. That sound familiar to everybody? Here's the great thing about that. With loan factors, it's a payment per what? What's behind the comma?
No.
1,000, right?
Yeah.
Get rid of it. That's how many times I'm making that payment. 228 times, right? Because it's a payment per 1,000. So just get rid of the thousands. So it's $5.53 times what?
288.
288. $15.92.64.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
If you come up with something like 288.624 or 288,624, you just
Turn the
make
comma
it
into a decimal.
into a decimal.
That's
multiply
exactly
by-
right. Same thing. That's a good question, Monty. Did everybody hear what he said? If there's not just zeros behind the comma, so like if this was 288,500, another way to think of it is turn the comma into a decimal. Everything from the comma back is from the decimal back. It would be times 288.5, right? Yes, no, you scare me. Let's look.
Earth feeder.
Huh? You okay? You look nauseous, so just checking. I have to check on her every once in a while. Is everybody good with this? Remember, don't make it any more complex. It's just a payment per 1,000. So the goal is to figure out how many thousands that person is borrowing. right? And then multiply that times that payment. And you will come up with the total. And remember, this is just the principal and interest payment, because that's the loan payment, right? If they were escrowing, that would be different. But this is just the loan portion, the debt service. Remember, that's how we refer to principal and interest, as the debt service. Okay, everybody good with that? All right. So, let's talk about the most common repayment plans, and we sort of mentioned these Tuesday night, but we want to make sure you've got them solidified in your mind. The most common is the fixed rate level payment. Fixed rate means the interest rate does what? Stays the same, does not change, and the payment stays the same over the entire term of the mortgage. An interest-only loan, and what's another word for interest-only? You need to know this because they will use them interchangeably. Term. A term loan is an interest-only loan. Make sure you know that terminology. A term loan is the same thing as an interest-only loan. What's key here about a term loan or interest-only loan? What is the key feature that you would know I'm looking at an interest-only loan? If you saw what two numbers and they were the same? Payments stay the same, and payments stay the same in most loans. There's two numbers that are going to be exactly the same in an interest-only loan. Think about what you're not paying down, folks.
The principal's one.
The principal. So, how about the beginning balance and the
ending balance.
ending balance are going to be exactly the same. No matter how many payments you make, no matter how long you keep that loan, in an interest-only loan, the beginning balance and the ending balance are going to be exactly the same number.
So they might try to confuse us by saying the principal was $350,000.
And the payoff was $350,000.
$350,000.
This is an example of which of the following loan types. The key thing to recognize is that the beginning balance and the ending balance are the exact same number. Now, an adjustable rate mortgage means that the interest rate can do what?
Fluctuate.
It can fluctuate. Now, in your book, they talk about some of the different ways interest rates can fluctuate. Obviously, they can fluctuate up, which is what they most likely will do. They could theoretically go down as well, but the key there is when they change, when the interest rates change, they change based on some index usually. They're usually tied to some publicly published number, like the prime interest rate, for example, or LIBOR is another common one that they're tied to. So they're not just arbitrarily changing, they change if those numbers change. The other thing you need to know about adjustable rate loans is that, let me go to the screen here. With adjustable rate loans or ARMs, adjustable rate mortgage or ARM, that means the same thing, they usually include some limits on how often the rate can change and how much the rate can change at each adjustment, as well as how much the rate can change over the life of the loan. Okay? And we call those caps. We call them adjustment caps if we're talking about how much it can change at each interval. So if you have a 2-year ARM, what do you think the intervals are?
2 years.
Every what? A 2-year ARM, your intervals will be what?
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years. Means the rate can adjust every 2 years. If you have a 5-year ARM, that means the rate can adjust for how long?
Every 5 years.
5 years. It doesn't mean you've been loaned the money for 5 years. It means the adjustment cycles are every 5 years. Most 2-year ARMs or 5-year ARMs are actually 30-year amortization cycles. Meaning you've borrowed the money for how long? 30 years. But it's a 2-year ARM, meaning the rate can adjust how often? Every 2 years. So when you first get that loan, your rate's going to be locked in for how long? 2 years, and then the rate could change. And at that point in time, it would be compared to some publicly published index, like the prime interest rate or the LIBOR. Well, if it's tied to some publicly traded number, why do they almost always adjust up? Because it's not true that those public numbers always go up. Why is it that these things almost always adjust up? Because who said that? Who said? Lord bless you. Say it again.
Because they start so late.
Because they start artificially low. And why do they start artificially low? Compare it to a fixed rate loan.
The first 2 years is more enticing.
It's more enticing. In other words, if they weren't artificially low, would anybody sign up for one that could change? No. You'd get a fixed rate one, right? If you went out and you looked at fixed rate mortgages are 4% and adjustable rate mortgages start at 4.5 and they could adjust from there, you'd be like, hell no, I'm not getting that. Well, I'm going to pay more now and I can pay even more later? That's insanity, right? So they almost always adjust up, and the perception is that they always go up because they always start artificially low to entice you to take them. An adjustable rate mortgage, on the residential side anyway, will almost always be at a lower rate, and we call it the teaser rate, for an initial interest rate. That doesn't mean they're automatically a bad thing. There are plenty of adjustable rate mortgages that are a great deal. One of the most popular in this state is the State Employees Credit Union loan. State Employees Credit Union does almost exclusively 5-year ARMs. Yes, ma'am.
For those arm rates, did you say they give you a limit though as far as how far a range they could cap out?
They give you 2 sets of limits. Her question is, Phoebe's question is, well, didn't I say something about limits on these things? And yes, there are 2 types of limits on these adjustments. There are the adjustment cycle limits. The rate can only go up by X% per cycle. So like with the State Employees Credit Union 5-year ARM, for example. It's a 5-year ARM, which means the rate's locked in for how long? 5 years, and it can change every how often after that. Every 5 years after that. And it can change no more than 1.5% at each adjustment cycle.
So you could know how much it could possibly go
You can
up.
anticipate the worst case scenario.
Right.
That's exactly right. So you know in year 9, say if you go get that State Employees Credit Union 5-year ARM today, and they give you 3.5% on that loan, which is I think what they're at right now on that loan. 3.5%. Year 9, what's the worst your interest rate can be? 5%. Because it can only adjust every 5 years, so you would have only adjusted one time, right? And the maximum adjustment on that loan per cycle is 1.5%. So even if they take the maximum adjustment, the most you could be paying in year 9 is 5%.
What's the index on that one?
They use LIBOR. They use LIBOR for theirs.
So,
Yes.
if you refinance at your 2 or 5 years just to get out of that adjustable,
Now she's thinking like a borrower. A smart borrower will use adjustable rate loans in exactly that way. They will finance and take the teaser rate, lock it in for whatever amount of time they can get, and hope that they can refinance before the first adjustment hits into a fixed rate that will be lower than the adjusted rate on their new adjustable. So essentially you're gambling that interest rates won't do what substantially? Go up. So if I go take that State Employees 5-year ARM right now at 3.5%, it's locked for 5 years. 4 years from now, if interest rates are at 4.5%, am I going to take the first adjustment, which is probably going to take me to 5, or am I going to refinance into a fixed rate something at 4.5%? I'm going to refinance, most likely. That makes sense for you? But if interest rates had jumped to 7%, what would I do? I'd stay in that ARM and let it go to 5.
And try to refinance after that.
And then hope they come back down after that. Because even at the next adjustment, it can only go up to 6.5, right?
So even if say the adjustable rate goes, or the rate that they use to judge by goes down, do they have to, are they required to stay within that range
Yes.
below? Okay.
Absolutely,
So they would-
because usually what they publish is their rate will be LIBOR plus something, you know? So whatever if you look like, right now LIBOR is 2-point-something%, right? And I think the state employees loan is LIBOR plus 3.5%, I think is what their rate is. But remember, they still can't adjust you more than that 1.5%. Even if LIBOR went up to 5, so you should be at 6.5, they can't adjust you that far in one cycle. You know, that's what the cap is for, is to limit the amount of adjustment. But if LIBOR went down, and in fact, my first home loan, I had a state employees credit union. I was working for the university in Chapel Hill, and I had a state employees credit union loan. The first adjustment cycle that came, my rate actually went down, because interest rates had dropped so substantially that they had dropped even lower than my teaser rate was on my own. So I've actually had one that adjusted down.
And when it adjusted again, it could only go up back to kind of where you started.
Well, at the next cycle, that 1.5% cap was still there. So
Okay.
even if rates had jumped back up, I was locked in at that rate for 5 more years and could only adjust up 1.5 from there.
So it's wherever you are, that's where it starts. It doesn't, if you went from 5 to 3.5, the next cycle, you wouldn't go to 6.5.
You couldn't, that's
Okay.
right, because you could only go up 1.5 from wherever you were.
Okay.
Yep, yes ma'am.
Is this why certain banks won't refinance their own loans because of people using, say, a loan like I guess the.
I don't know about that, I've not encountered that particular phenomenon, but, I mean, so I don't know the answer to that.
Like certain banks won't refinance their loans on certain things, and I was just.
Well, I can see where a bank would refuse to refinance you if you were gonna get a better rate automatically. You know, they might just say, I mean, it doesn't make financial sense to them. If they, you know, if you're gonna refinance to 4.5 or your rate's gonna reset to 5, they may just say, no, we're not gonna I mean, you know, they may make you put up or shut up at that point. You know, it's just I can see where they would make a financial decision about that, potentially. I've generally not encountered it, but I can see where they might.
Would it,
It's not in their interest to do that.
couldn't they go?
Financial.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, no, I'm good.
But then you would still, you could take your business.
That's what I was gonna say.
And they may prefer you do that at that point, because the refinance may actually cost them more than getting the money, because remember, that if they get your money back, they can write a brand new loan with all the origination fees and all the things that go along with that, and it's more of a money maker for them at that point, to churn the loan. They have a lot of formulas that go into their decisions on that kind of stuff. Okay? Is everybody good on that? And then Phoebe, the follow-up, or the end of the answer to your question is, the other type of cap, or what we call a lifetime cap. Most ARMs also have a lifetime cap. They have an adjustment cycle cap. It can only adjust this much per cycle. And then they usually also have a lifetime cap, where the rate cannot go above this amount. All right? But remember, 1.5% sounds like not much, but it makes a big difference on the house statement. Big difference. Everybody good on the adjustable rates? Okay? And like I said, we usually refer to that initial rate as the teaser rate, because it's going to be below the market rate. All right? Most ARMs don't have prepayment penalties, and sometimes they can be converted to a fixed rate loan. Those are called convertible loans. An adjustable rate that converts to a fixed rate. That is most common in construction. Sometimes you hear them referred to as construction to perm loans. In other words, while the house is being built, is there more risk on lending on something that's not yet built than there is on lending on something that is built?
Yes.
Yes, much more risk. So you think interest rates are going to be higher and more volatile for construction type loans? Yeah. So a lot of times if you're building a house, you may take out what's called a construction to permanent loan that's an adjustable rate loan during the construction period and then transitions to a fixed rate note once the home is completed. That's a convertible loan. Graduated payment mortgages just means the payment is designed to go up over time. These are generally designed for professionals, particularly doctors, because they go into residency and they're not making a lot of money early in their career, but they will be making significantly more. I mean, you take somebody who, for example, is a cardiologist. During their residency, they may be making 50 grand a year. And as soon as they finish their residency, they're making 500 grand a year, or $1 million a year. And so a lot of times they want to go ahead and get settled into a home. So certain banks will do these graduated payment mortgages, which allow them a low payment up front and a much higher payment down the road. Fifth Third does a lot of these. Yeah, Fifth Third does a lot of these.
So that allows them to get the type home they could afford at their,
At their future salary, that's exactly right. Because a lot of these doctors, when they come out of residency, they're already married, they got kids, they want to get settled into their lifestyle. And so they want to buy the type of home that they know they're going to be able to afford, because they know they're going to be able to afford it. They just know for these 2 years or 3 years, whatever their residency period is, that they really can't afford it yet. So they get in these graduated payment loans, which are essentially just a vehicle for deferring interest, and then it's going to catch back up later on down the road when they can afford it better. All right, we talked about balloon payments. I think all of y'all are good on balloon payments, right? Remember, the balloon payments come into play whenever we're talking about something that's not fully amortized. Fully amortized means paid down to what? Zero. So partially amortized would give us a balloon payment, right? Is the balloon payment going to be more or less than the original loan amount? Less, but more than zero, right? That's a partially amortized loan. A term or interest-only loan is going to have a balloon payment that's going to be exactly what? The same as the original principal balance. And a negative amortization loan is going to have a balloon payment that is higher than the original amount borrowed, because we haven't been covering the interest on that loan.
Interest only, why would somebody do that?
Why would somebody do interest only? The reason you do anything other than fully amortized is to lower your payment. That's always the reason. If I'm doing interest only, it means I really probably cannot afford the fully amortized payment. So, you know, lots of times investors might do this on investment type properties because they're using the cash flow generated by the property to pay the note, right? And so they're not really interested in paying the note down, they just want to pay that expense and keep the difference in their pocket. So you see interest-only loans done in those cases. Yes, sir, Michael.
I've heard mortgages that were set up to pay every 2 weeks, which means they're paying a little bit more.
Yes,
than
those
normal.
are called bi-weekly payments.
Are those usually amortized over 30 years?
They are amortized over 30 years, but the payment cycle itself will shorten that significantly. Yeah, because you end up making the equivalent of an extra monthly payment a year.
Right.
Do you have a question, Jen?
I was going to say, if someone tries to sell, if they enter into an interest-only situation, are they able to sell their property prior to the end of that lease?
Sure,
that loan?
absolutely, absolutely. Any of these financing choices are going to allow them the freedom to sell the property at any time because they have title to the property.
Okay.
There's only one finance vehicle that prevents you from selling the property, and what is that? Test you from the previous chapter. What's the one way you can finance a property where you don't have title to the property, so you can't sell it? An installment land contract, a contract for deed. An installment land contract is the only financing choice where you wouldn't have the ability to sell.
Are we likely to see that on the test? Installment land contract?
They'll ask you something about one, for sure.
That's
But you could still build equity with an interest-only loan.
Yes, okay.
So Ty asked an interesting question. She didn't really ask a question, she was kind of mumbling about some stuff up here, but I'm going to formulate a question out of her mumbles. She's talking about the idea of equity and an interest-only loan. Equity is an important word. Let's talk about equity. What do you think equity means? What does that word equity
The
mean?
difference in what it's worth and what you owe?
That's the best way to define it. Everybody hear that definition? Monty said equity is the difference at any given point in time between what it's worth and what I owe. That's my equity. Now at purchase, what's another word for equity or another phrase for equity?
Down payment.
Down payment, right? Down payment is our equity at closing, at purchase. But our equity fluctuates over our duration of ownership, right? Because in theory, we're paying the loan balance what?
Monthly.
Down.
Down.
And hopefully the property's also doing what?
Going up.
Appreciate.
Going up in value or appreciating, right? So our equity should be growing. Well, Ty said, well, what about interest-only loans and equity? Can you build equity when you have an interest-only loan?
If the market's good.
Absolutely, because while you're not paying the loan balance down, you still got the other piece working for you, right? The property may increase in value and you could still build equity. So if a perfect scenario for an investor would be a zero down interest-only loan in a hot market. Because I don't have to pull any money out of my pocket. I'm using the cash generated by renting out the property to make the note payment on it. I got a little bit of money left over to put in my pocket. And by the way, how much did I invest? Nothing. So I'm getting a return on nothing. And then the property's going up in value, so when I sell it, I have made some money on my $0 investment, right? So if you could find that deal, that's the sweetheart deal of them all, right? A zero down, interest only loan in an appreciating market. Could you even build equity in a negatively amortized loan?
Yes.
Sure. If the market was really booming and things were going up in value faster than the interest was adding up on the back end of that loan. That's what got a lot of people in trouble in that pick-a-payment loan. Well, see, the whole underlying idea behind that pick-a-payment loan was it didn't matter that they weren't paying their mortgage down. Because they could always do what? They could sell, or from the bank's perspective, do what? Refinance. And why could they always refinance? Because the
everything was
property
going-
value was going to always do what?
Go up until
Go
it did.
up.
Until
That
it
was
did.
the underlying supposition, belief, under the housing bubble, that property value would always go up. Well, if you look over a long enough period of time, that's true, right? But if you buy in 2005 and you sell in 2008, is that necessarily true?
Or if you just refinanced in 2005.
Or if you just refinanced. Because think about these people that had that pick-a-payment loan, we said they were making the what? The minimum payment, right? And that was not even covering the interest. So what was happening to their loan balance every month?
Going up.
And not only was that an option loan, that's what you call an option loan. Pick-a-payment was their cutesy name for it. It's called an option loan because you have the option of what payment to make. It was an option arm. What's that arm part stand for?
Adjustable rate.
Adjustable rate. And in these cases, they weren't capped at 1.5% adjustments, and they weren't 5-year adjustment cycles. They were mostly 1-year arms that could adjust to market rates. So they would get a 2% interest rate, option arm. And they would only make the minimum payment, and their loan balance would actually go up over those 2 years. And then at the end of 2 years, their payment jumped from $1,500 to $2,800 because of the change in the interest rate. But it was no problem because we could do what?
Pick a payment.
We could refinance them. Some of these people were refinanced 8 and 9 times over the course of several years. And heck, they were even pulling cash out of these refinances. The banks were giving them cash out of these refinances because supposedly the market had appreciated so much. Well then, nobody could qualify for the amounts of these loans because they didn't make enough money. We're going to talk about debt to income ratios later tonight. So then the idea became, well, we won't check. If you want to qualify for this loan, you need to make $180,000. You do make $180,000, right?
No doc.
We're not going to check. Call them ninja loans. No income, no job, no assets. Whatever you said on that application, they took it as gold. They didn't check. No verification, no documentation. there, 60 Minutes did a lot of stories on this. 60 Minutes was great during the collapse for some of their investigative journalism. But there's one out there about World Savings if you ever want to go watch it. It's fantastic. It's well done. But there's a lady in there. There's a lady in there, and they ask her how much her monthly income is. And she says that she gets a Social Security check for about $2,000 a month. And the interviewer says, but that your income on here is different than that. She said, well, they went by my husband's income. And the interviewer says, oh, but your husband had already been laid off. She said, oh no, he was passed away.
Oh my God.
And here was the great thing. They actually noted that on the loan application and still used his income to qualify her. Her house payment was more than her total monthly income. That is where a housing bubble comes from. Because the only way you can build values that fast, the only way you can have a $200,000 house become a $300,000 house in 6 months is if you're continually qualifying people who either shouldn't be qualified at all, or you're qualifying them for far more than they should be qualified for. You're making up the money. You're just making the numbers up, pulling them from thin air. Folks, I know I'm on my soapbox now, it ain't got nothing to do with the test, but we're the first line of defense against this stuff. I mean, we are. I lived through it. I watched, and look, I participated. I put the commission in my pocket. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't do it. I watched a good friend from high school, and I promise you I tried to stop him. I went to my 10-year high school reunion. The guy I had not seen since we graduated high school. I played football with him. He was moving to Raleigh. And he came down here and he wanted to buy a new house. Now, he made about $60,000 a year. He was looking at $400,000 houses. And I said, Chris, what are you doing? Well, they qualified me for $450,000. I said, I don't care what they qualified you for. First of all, do you know how much it's going to cost to heat and cool these houses? You know, second of all, they're qualifying you based on these teaser rates. That's not going to last forever. If you can't afford the payment at the reset rate, you don't need to get into it. I begged him, showed him all these other houses, thought I had talked him out of it. Went out of state to a convention, and he went to a new construction sales office, and they wrote a contract while I was out of town. Now, he was nice enough to give the lady my business card, so I got paid on it. And they wrote a contract on a $415,000 house and then went back and added an $80,000 finished basement to it. Making $60,000 a year with a 2-year-old child. Wife's a stay-at-home mom.
Oh my God.
In a $500,000 house.
He wasn't good at math, was he?
Good at life.
You know what that looked like 2 years later?
Gone.
Foreclosure. Foreclosure. And that haunts me, folks, because that happened thousands of times over and over and over. Sometimes you can't save people from themselves, but sometimes you can. Sometimes you have to have a very real-world conversation. Just because a lender has qualified somebody for a number does not mean they can afford that number. Here's the most earth-shattering conversation you'll ever have with a first-time home buyer. They go get qualified for a loan and they give them a price. They say, you qualify for $225. Ask them for that loan estimate. Because on that loan estimate, it's got an estimated monthly payment down there at the bottom. They ain't paid attention to that number. They've looked at what they were qualified for, right? And so you've got to have this conversation early, because if you start showing $225,000 houses, you can't back them down to $175 later, because then they all look like crap to them. You've got to have this conversation early on, and you sit down with them and you say, okay, how much is your rent right now? This is the don't ask them can they afford that number, because they'll lie. Oh yeah, that's fine. How much is your rent right now? Because they won't know what you're getting at. You got to come at them from the side, right? How much is your rent? And they'll say something like, oh, it's $1,400. And I'm looking down here and it says $1,848 for that monthly payment. I said, so what are y'all doing with the $500 a month you're saving right now? How much of that have you saved up? Oh, do we need some money for the down payment or something? I said, If you aren't saving $500 a month right now, where's it going to come from when you buy this house? And folks, I know that sounds disconnected from our job, which is to sell, right? But here's the thing. You do that for somebody, that's a client for life. You won't sell them one house. You'll sell them 5. And when their kids get ready to buy a house down the road, they'll make sure their kids use you and their brothers and sisters and their cousins, because they will come to realize and appreciate what you did for them, that you were the only one who was willing to break it down for them like that. I know that's a soapbox thing, but I think it's important for y'all to hear that, because you are helping people with the biggest decision they've ever made in their life, in most cases. And it's a huge decision. I think there are 2 things that every real estate broker ought to do in residential real estate. And I know some of you won't be in this situation, but that's okay. Number 1, you should own your own house, because you should practice what you preach. I would not go to somebody who was 40 years old trying to sell me a house who rented one for themselves. I'm sorry, I wouldn't. Not unless there was some specific, they'd have to explain to me why you rent. Because to me, if you're going to sell me one, you might have one. What am I missing here, right?
Have one somewhere.
Number 2, you need to move every 5 years. You know why? Because you need to realize the hell you're putting your clients through. It is stressful to move. And we act like it's nothing. Oh, just do this, this, and this, and this. Pack up all your stuff. Put it in a pod. Just pack all your family, just take them down and put them. That's hard for people. And part of learning this business and part of developing a loyal customer base is putting yourself in their shoes every once in a while. And I fully say that, having lived 7 years in my current house, and I really don't want to move right now, but I know how bad it is. But you really should put yourself through it every once in a while, because otherwise you haven't walked in their shoes and known what it's like to try to balance close on this one and buy on this one and not know where you're going to sleep those 2 nights in the middle. Where are you going to put your dogs? What are you going to do with your kids? There's a lot of upheaval in that, and you need to experience it some. Okay? But do y'all understand kind of these loans? What we're talking about? Something? Yes, sir, Ron.
In the situation you just described, where you told the person where you're going to get are you saving $500 a month?
Mm-hmm.
I would do exactly that. I mean, the commission, it's irrelevant at that
Well,
point.
I'd rather have one smaller one and get some more down the road
I
and
would
then,
too.
and then be happy.
But my point is, and I really don't care what the answer is, I just want to know, how many people do you lose because you're like
Very
that?
few.
Good,
Very few. Very
good.
few. Because I tell them, look, if you want to buy that 225 house, I will help you buy it. But I'm telling you, you're going to have a hard time affording it. And because owning a house is not cheap, you're going to have to buy a lawnmower. You're going to have to, you got to buy filters for air conditioning. Ain't nobody going to come in and change it for you every month. You got to do it. And they need to hear that, especially those first-time home buyers, because they're on cloud 9. They think it's just all peaches and cream, It ain't. Trust me. It's not. Stuff breaks. And at the worst possible time. I had my water heater explode one day when I was walking out of the house to go to Las Vegas. Literally. And Kim knows because she's supposed to dog sit for me. And I called her. And I said, look, take a shower before you get over here because there ain't no water. The plumber's on the way. But there was water literally running down my hallway in my house. It happens. And when you own a house, it's going to happen. It's part of the deal. All right. So we're good on balloon payments? We're good on the idea of amortization. Good. A buy-down loan. This is different than discount points, but it works the same way. A buy-down loan is buying down the interest rate. Here's the difference, though. With discount points, you're buying down the rate over the full life of the loan. Okay? You're buying that rate down over the full life of the loan. With a buy-down, you're only buying it down for a very limited amount of time. The most common is 3 years. And the most common type of buy-down is actually called a 3-2-1 buy-down. Because you buy the rate down by 3% in year 1, you buy it down by 2% in year 2, you buy it down by 1% in year 3, and in year 4 it goes to the natural rate. Yes?
Natural rate when you get the loan or natural rate at the time?
The natural rate when you get the loan. So whatever the prevailing market rate is at that point in time. So say right now, prevailing rate's 4.5%, right? If I got a 3-2-1 buy down, what would my rate be in year one? 1.5%. And then in year two, it would be 2.5%. And in year three, it would be 3.5%. And in year four, it would go to the 4.5 and stay there. Let me tell you who does this. Builders. Builders do this. Why would a builder buy an interest rate down in the beginning?
He's gonna sell it anyway.
They do what?
He's hoping to sell it anyway.
Well, they sell in the house, but what kind of house are they selling?
A new one.
If the interest rate is bought down, what does the affordability look like? What does the price point do? It goes up. They don't care if you can make that payment in year three. They care if you can make it in year one. Because guess what? You're qualified based on the payment for the first year. You're not qualified based on the reset payment. You're qualified based on the payment for year one.
So, okay, so when you say construction loans, this is the people who want to build new construction.
So when they're selling the house, they will offer this as an incentive to buyers.
So,
We will buy your rate down for the first 3 years.
oh, okay, I got you. So what you're
Because what it
saying,
does is it qualifies the buyer for more money, which means the builder can sell a higher price point house.
so he's just giving them enough money to do the buy down.
He's right, he's giving the buyer enough money to buy the rate down,
Right.
because the builder might, say the buy down costs him $7,500. But if that $7,500 makes him buy a $30,000 more expensive house, it's worth doing. Builders are notorious for doing these. Okay? Does everybody understand the major difference between this and a discount point? A discount point is over the life of the loan.
Now, is there a reference for what it costs for the buy down?
No.
Because there is on the discount.
Yeah, there is on discount point.
So that's just market rate, whatever? Okay.
And usually what the builders do, and I've only ever seen builders do them, I've never seen them actually offered to borrowers. But the builders will have like a preferred lender, and they'll negotiate some fee with that preferred lender to do it that way.
Okay. So the lender knows that there's a potential of having a borrower who's a short-term thinker that may have trouble making the payment 4 years down the
But they're
road.
gonna sell it.
Okay,
They're gonna sell it.
okay.
That's exactly right. Yeah. We already talked about essential elements of a note. We already talked about rights of borrowers and lenders. All right. So, what rights do borrowers have and duties? Pay the debt. That's the big one. Make the payment. Pay the taxes. Pay the taxes on the property. Maintain insurance on the property. And maintain the property itself. Those are all things that the borrower must do. Now, we also say that we should get lender authorization for making major alterations, but I don't know anybody that does. I've never seen that actually happen in the real world. I don't know of anybody that calls their bank and says, hey, I'm thinking about adding on to my house. Right? And it gives them the right to possess the property. What rights do the mortgage lenders have? To transfer the mortgage, which would make, because remember it's a negotiable instrument, they can sell it. And the right to foreclose. Those are their rights. We already talked about the different methods of foreclosure last night. We talked about judicial foreclosure, which would happen in a what theory state? Lien theory. A judicial foreclosure would happen in a lien theory state, whereas a non-judicial or power of sale foreclosure would happen in a title theory, such as
North Carolina.
North Carolina. We do the power of sale foreclosure here. You don't need to know what strict foreclosure is. You're not going to see it on the test. You do need to know this chart. Remember when we talked about priority of liens way back earlier in the chapters? Well, foreclosures have their own set of priorities. When the property is sold at the courthouse in a foreclosure sale, so when the trustee goes down to the courthouse and sells that property in a foreclosure sale, they have to pay off the debts in this order. Here's one of the really interesting things about that. Notice taxes is not at the top of the list. What's at the top of the list?
Cost of sale.
Cost of the sale. Who would be included in cost of the sale?
Attorney?
Trustee. Am I not a cost of the sale, my commission. We actually get paid first in foreclosure sales. If we participate in a foreclosure sale, we get paid even before the taxes do. Because otherwise, we'd never get paid at all. Right? And then they pay the taxes, and then the mortgages in the order that they're recorded in, and then other liens such as mechanics liens, and then the laughable one at the end that James asked about the other night, pay any surplus to the borrower. And it's laughable for a number of reasons. I mean, think about, I don't mean to be insulting to people, but think about how stupid you'd have to be to allow your house to be foreclosed on.
And expect some money.
Well, not only really expect some money, but if it was worth enough that somebody could foreclose on it, take it from you, sell it, pay all the debts, and there still be money left over. Well, dummy, why didn't you sell it yourself? Right? I mean, like, how dumb do you have to be to allow that to happen?
Buy $500,000 house on $60,000.
I'm sorry?
Buy $500,000 house on $60,000.
Yeah, but a $500,000 house, trust me, there's not going to be any surplus in that sale. You can believe that. But if there is one, it goes back to the borrower. And that's why most of the time, the trustees really don't try to drive up the numbers in these foreclosure sales. All they're trying to get to is the number that satisfies the lender. Because they don't want to have to hunt down the borrower and pay them the difference. They really don't. The right of redemption. You need to know North Carolina's redemption period. Mackenzie, you asked about the right of redemption, right? Wasn't it you who was asking about, could you pay it off? I think it was you. Or Ashley. One of the two of them. That was asking about showing up and paying off everything you owe and getting the property back during the foreclosure process. You can do that. You can do that. If you somehow hit the scratch-off tickets and win the lottery, or money falls in your lap, somebody dies and leaves you some money, you can go down to the courthouse and you don't have to participate in the bid process. You can simply pay what you owe and redeem the property at any time before the foreclosure sale is made final. So let's talk about what makes a foreclosure sale final. In North Carolina, that sale is not final until a bid has gone 10 days without being upset. So there's absolutely no need for you to go to a county courthouse when they're auctioning the property. It's not an auction like you think. They're not out there taking bids. They're not doing that. They put a piece of paper up in the clerk's office, and you bid. And you have to write a certified check or bring a certified check for some percentage of your bid, and you give that amount to the clerk, and you become the high bidder. And the clock starts, 10 days. And during that 10 days, anybody else can come in and outbid you. And if they do, you know what happens to the clock? It resets at 10 days again. And it doesn't matter how many times that happens, every time the bid is upset, it's a new 10 days. And by the way, this right of redemption is running during that whole time, because we said you could redeem it any time prior to what? Prior to the final foreclosure sale. And that doesn't happen until the bid has gone 10 days without being upset. Does everybody follow that? So this can stretch out for a very long time in some cases. It can be a tediously slow process. I mean, you can sit there and wait 9 days and think you got it, and then somebody upsets your bid. Everybody good on that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Make sure you're familiar with that. A deficiency judgment is a personal judgment. It's not a specific lien, it's a personal lien that would be applied to a borrower after a foreclosure. What do you think has happened here? We foreclosed on the property, and what's also true?
We didn't get enough from it.
We didn't get enough money from it. We sold it, we paid the lender what we got, but it wasn't enough, and the lender has gone to court and gotten a judgment against us. Now, for most part, these judgments are fairly worthless for a certain period of time, because most of the time the borrower doesn't have the money. I'll tell you when they become not worthless. 8 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later, when that person wants to buy another house. Because what's that next lender going to say? You got to take care of this judgment. And so eventually they'll go back and find Bank of America and pay them their $15,000 or $50,000 or whatever it is to get that judgment off so that they can borrow money again. And in a lot of cases, one of the new industries is banks are selling their deficiency judgments. At one point in time, Bank of America had something like $15 billion worth of deficiency judgments on file, and they were selling them for 20% on the dollar, so 20 cents on the dollar. So, if you were willing to pay them 20 cents on the dollar, you could get a deficiency judgment, and then you had the right to that debt. You had to try to collect it. Everybody good on what a deficiency judgment is? It is not allowed in seller financing. So if you buy the property and you do seller financing, and they have to foreclose and take the property back from you, they're not allowed to get a deficiency judgment. The idea behind that is that they started with the property, they ended with the property, so what damage do they really have? A deed in lieu of foreclosure is also sometimes called a friendly foreclosure. It simply means that the borrower and the lender have agreed that the lender is not going to foreclose on the property because the borrower is going to do what with it? Give it back. You're going to give it to him. You can sign a deed and give it to him. You're just going to give it to you. You don't have to foreclose on me. Don't bother to file the paperwork. Here's the property.
But it's still considered a foreclosure for them on their credit as.
On their credit, it still counts as a foreclosure. But it saves them from a deficiency judgment.
Oh.
Which is why the lenders don't often want to do it, because the lenders give up the right to a deficiency judgment if they accept a deed in lieu of foreclosure. Short sales. A short sale happens when the property is worth less than what's owed on it, and the lender has agreed to still let you sell it for that lesser amount, and they're going to remove their lien. They're not going to make you pay the difference. So you owe $200,000, you got a buyer who buy it at $190, and Bank of America has said, okay, we will take $190 and we'll remove our lien from the property. Yes.
This may seem stupid, but can they then do a deficiency judgment?
They can. That does not seem stupid at all. They absolutely can do a deficiency judgment still. And will, in most cases. And will. Why would the bank do that? Why would the bank agree to participate in that and know they're going to get less than what they're owed? Because they get more than what they would in foreclosure. Because what happens when people get foreclosed on? They tear it up, right? And if they got to go through the foreclosure process, that may take several more months. Several more months of them not doing what? Making a mortgage payment. So that's more lost money. So the bank may decide it's better to cut our losses right now. And that's where the negotiating power of the borrower comes in. Because if they want to avoid that deficiency judgment, that's when they say, okay, you want to do this, it's best for you. What's best for me is no deficiency judgment. I'll help you get it sold, I'll repaint it, I'll cut the grass, I'll make it look real pretty and get the best amount of money we can, but I want no deficiency judgment. That's a negotiation that could take place.
I have a question. So with these short sales, well, I guess not for the friendly foreclosure, but say a short sale, and they're wanting to get out of this house, or say, it's $200,000, the bank's gonna take the $190 like you said, but then they still have to have somewhere to live, and they're probably gonna get this deficiency judgment. Are they gonna be able to get a loan
No,
anywhere?
no. But that's already gone out the window anyway. Because the bank is never going to consider a short sale if you're current on your mortgage. Because the bank's simply going to say to you, just keep paying the mortgage, you're doing good, it's not so bad. You go to the bank and your house is only worth $190 and you owe $200 and you're current on your mortgage, they'll be like, what do you want us to do about it? But you go to them when you ain't made a mortgage payment in a year, they got a whole new perspective on things then. So you're not getting a mortgage anyway in that case. It's a good question, but I just wanted to understand kind of the dynamic that's going on there. Because they have to, really, the bank's at gunpoint. They know that at that point their two options are short sale or foreclosure.
So, when, okay, So was there, no, it wasn't there, so not too long ago, when people's home values were less than what they had gotten their loans for.
Not too long ago.
Yeah, when these loans go, and a lot of people were doing these short sales, but it wasn't necessarily because they couldn't afford it, it just didn't make sense for them to pay these.
Well, I mean, you know, some of them just decided their credit wasn't worth paying into a $50,000 hole.
Gotcha.
They ruined their credit.
Yeah, okay.
For a certain number of years.
So you have to ruin your credit. to
Oh,
do
yeah, no
this.
question. A short sale's gonna ruin your credit for a
Okay.
while.
I didn't know.
It's not as bad as a foreclosure,
Okay,
but it's not good.
okay.
It's not good. You're gonna be looking at least 4 to 5 years before you can get any sort of a reasonable, sizable loan.
So it's two different things that would show up on someone's credit. It would be the short sale and then the deficiency judgment if there were one. Like it would show up differently.
Yes.
It's different things.
That's right.
It's not awful.
Yeah, it's bad, ain't it? But it's better than foreclosure, though. Foreclosure is the ultimate red flag, especially on a primary residence. Because somebody who gets foreclosed on in their home, you know they are in financial ruin, because that is, you know, the last thing people will let go in most cases. All right? Everybody good on what a short sale is? The key there is the bank is agreeing to remove their lien for less than the amount of the lien. Don't say they're forgiving the amount, because that may or may not be true. That's not the key. We don't care if they forgive the debt. We care if they remove the lien. Because remember, what we've got to be able to do is pass title with that lien removed. That's the key to a short sale, from our perspective anyway. Whether they forgive the debt, and there's all kinds of tax implications when they forgive that debt. That can be income. They have to pay income taxes on it. You know, if the bank does forgive it, if they don't get a deficiency judgment, they just say, okay, you don't owe us the $20,000. Guess what? They're paying taxes on this $20,000. That's a whole other problem people found themselves in. You want to talk about getting out of the frying pan and into the fire. You got the bank. You go from the bank chasing you to the IRS chasing you. All right. Assumption. We talked about this a little bit on Tuesday night. An assumption is when a new buyer takes over the existing loan of a homeowner. Okay? You're taking over their loan. And like Chad asked, are they usually paying some difference in cash? And the answer is yes. And that some difference in cash could also be in the form of another mortgage, right? So if I have, you know, if I'm selling my house for $200,000 and I have $150,000 VA loan that the buyer's assuming, they've got to come up with $50,000 more from somewhere, either out of their pocket or they can get a second mortgage for that $50,000. I don't care what they get.
So it's not just with the VA loans then? It's with-
No, any loan can be assumable, but VA loans and FHA loans are automatically assumable.
Going back to the assumability of the VA loan, and if I let somebody assume it, I can't use that balance
You cannot use that entitlement, correct?
until it's sold or it's liberated.
Yep.
What if they go into foreclosure? Does that hurt me, other than at the end of foreclosure, I get it back?
You'd have to wait for the foreclosure sale to be finalized. Yeah. Which could be a long time. Yeah.